The pre-dawn darkness clung to the Pacific like a shroud as Captain Marcus Viper Rodriguez guided his F-22 Raptor through the storm front at 38,000 feet. Lightning illuminated the cockpit in strobing flashes, each burst revealing his weathered face set in concentration behind the oxygen mask. 8 years of flying these skies had taught him to read the ocean's moods, but today something felt different. Wrong. Viper, this is Ghost. Storm's getting nasty down here. Lieutenant Sarah Chen's voice crackled through his headset from 2 miles off his starboard wing. Her F-22 cut through the turbulence like a knife, vapor trails streaming behind her in the thin air. Weather Service called this a Category 2, but these winds feel more like a 4. Marcus checked his instruments, noting the violent updrafts buffeting his aircraft. The storm was the least of his concerns. For 3 days running, long-range reconnaissance satellites had detected anomalous radar signatures in this sector, ghost contacts that appeared and vanished without explanation. Command insisted they were atmospheric disturbances caused by the unusual weather patterns, but Viper's gut told him otherwise. 16 years in the cockpit had given him instincts that radar couldn't match. Copy that, Ghost. Keep your distance from those cells. We're not here to fight Mother Nature. He adjusted his heading slightly, scanning the horizon through his heads-up display. The mission briefing had been routine. Patrol the contested waters between American and disputed territorial boundaries, observe and report, nothing more. But routine missions in this part of the world had a nasty habit of turning deadly without warning. The radio hissed with static before Command's voice cut through. Raptor Flight, this is Control. Be advised, we're tracking multiple surface contacts 40 nautical miles northeast of your position. Commercial fishing vessels, but they're running dark, no transponders, no radio chatter. Viper's jaw tightened. Fishing boats running silent in international waters during a storm. Either they were incredibly stupid, or they weren't fishermen at all. Control requesting permission to investigate. Those coordinates put them right in our patrol zone. Negative Raptor Flight. Maintain current heading and altitude. Our diplomatic friends are already handling the surface situation. Marcus felt the familiar knot form in his stomach. In pilot parlance, diplomatic friends usually meant CIA operatives or special forces conducting operations that officially didn't exist. The kind of operations that had a tendency to draw enemy attention. 20 minutes later, his suspicions proved prophetic. Contact. Ghost's voice exploded through his headset, sharp with adrenaline. Multiple bogeys, bearing 035, Angels 28 and climbing fast. Count 6 no, make that 8 aircraft. They just appeared out of nowhere. Viper's eyes snapped to his radar display. 8 contacts had indeed materialized seemingly from thin air, moving in a perfect V formation at supersonic speed. His blood chilled as he processed their approach vector. These weren't random aircraft stumbling into their patrol area. They were heading directly for the American fighters with the precision of guided missiles. Control, this is Viper. We have 8 unidentified aircraft inbound, hot and fast, requesting immediate IFF verification. He switched to his threat warning system, watching as the enemy contacts resolved into individual targets. Something about their flight patterns nagged at him. Too coordinated, too professional for pirates or smugglers. Static filled his headset for several long seconds before Control responded. Raptor Flight, stand by for IFF verification. Maintain defensive posture only. Repeat, weapons tight. Sir, they're moving into intercept formation, Ghost reported, her voice tight with controlled tension. These guys know what they're doing. This isn't some amateur hour operation. Viper watched the enemy aircraft spread into an attack formation that would have made his old instructor proud. Whoever was flying those birds had received the same training he had. Control, we need those IFF codes now. These bogeys are showing hostile intent. Raptor Flight, negative on hostile intent. Our intelligence indicates these are friendly aircraft conducting training exercises in international waters. Maintain position and observe only. The words hit Viper like a physical blow. Training exercises. His threat warning system was painting targets that were actively locking onto his aircraft. Either Command's intelligence was catastrophically wrong, or someone was feeding them false information. Ghost, are you seeing what I'm seeing? He checked his radar again, hoping he'd misread the display. No such luck. 8 distinct missile lock warnings flickered across his screen like angry red eyes. Affirmative, Viper. I've got multiple locks. These friendlies are targeting us like we're the enemy. Ghost's voice carried the edge of a pilot who just realized she might die in the next 60 seconds. Range closing to 20 miles. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cockpit's climate control. Every instinct screamed at him to engage, to fire first and ask questions later. But military discipline warred with survival instinct. Firing on aircraft that command insisted were friendlies would end his career and possibly land him in federal prison. Not firing might end his life. Control, requesting immediate weapons release authorization. We are being actively targeted by unknown aircraft. Negative, Raptor flight. You are ordered to maintain weapons tight. These aircraft are participating in a classified joint training exercise. Any aggressive action will result in court-martial proceedings. The authority in the controller's voice brooked no argument, but Viper noticed something that made his skin crawl. The voice was different, not the same controller who'd been handling their mission for the past 2 hours. Someone else had taken over communications, someone who seemed more interested in keeping them passive than keeping them alive. 15 miles and closing, Ghost reported. Viper, whatever these guys are up to, they're not backing down. My missile warning system is going crazy. Through his canopy, Viper could see the approaching aircraft as dark specks against the storm clouds, growing larger by the second. The lead fighter was close enough now that he could make out its basic configuration. Twin engines, swept wings, definitely military. But something about the silhouette bothered him. It looked familiar, too familiar. His blood turned to ice as recognition dawned. Ghost, brake left. Brake left now. The first missile streaked between their aircraft like a comet, its exhaust trail glowing against the dark sky. So much for friendly training exercises. Viper threw his Raptor into a violent evasive maneuver, pulling 7 Gs as he dove toward the deck. His vision grayed at the edges, but he fought to stay conscious as 2 more missiles sought his heat signature. Missiles in the air. Ghost's voice cracked with strain as she performed her own desperate dance with death. So much for friendlies, Control. But Control wasn't answering. The radio had gone completely silent, filled with nothing but the soft hiss of static. Whether it was equipment failure, enemy jamming, or something more sinister, Viper couldn't tell. What he did know was that he and Ghost were on their own, 38,000 feet above the Pacific, with 8 hostile aircraft trying to kill them. And the most terrifying part was that he'd finally gotten close enough to identify the enemy fighters. They were F-22 Raptors, identical to his own aircraft. The tail numbers were obscured by distance and storm clouds, but the configuration was unmistakable. Someone was hunting American pilots with American aircraft, and command either didn't know or didn't care. As another missile exploded just off his starboard wing, filling his cockpit with the orange glow of high explosives, Marcus Viper Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. He was done following orders. It was time to trust his instincts and fight back. Viper slammed his throttles forward, the twin Pratt & Whitney engines roaring to full military power as he pulled his Raptor into a climbing turn that would have snapped the spine of a lesser aircraft. The G-forces crushed him into his ejection seat, but adrenaline kept his vision clear as he watched Ghost's aircraft dance through a deadly ballet of incoming missiles. Fox 2. Fox 2, Ghost's voice rang through his headset as she fired a Sidewinder at the nearest bogey. The heat-seeking missile streaked away from her aircraft, its white-hot exhaust trail carving a burning line across the storm-darkened sky. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The enemy aircraft, the F-22 that should have been vaporized by Ghost's missile, simply vanished from his radar screen. Not destroyed, not damaged, gone. As if it had never existed. What the hell? Ghost's confusion echoed his own. Direct hit, but I'm showing no debris, no explosion. Just disappeared. Viper's mind raced as he processed the impossible. Stealth technology could make an aircraft nearly invisible to radar, but not to the naked eye, not at close range, and certainly not to a heat-seeking missile that had already locked onto its target. Unless, Ghost, those aren't standard Raptors, he shouted into his comm, as understanding dawned like a nightmare made real. They're running some kind of advanced countermeasure system. Another missile shrieked past his canopy, close enough that he could feel the heat through the reinforced glass. Viper threw his aircraft into a knife-edge turn, pulling 9 Gs that made his ribs creak and his vision tunnel. But even as he fought for his life, part of his mind cataloged the enemy's tactics. These pilots flew like Americans. Hell, they flew like him, using textbook maneuvers straight from the Air Force's own training manual. Control, this is Raptor flight. We are taking fire from hostile aircraft, requesting immediate backup and weapons-free authorization. He keyed his emergency frequency, broadcasting on every military channel simultaneously. Static. Nothing but empty static. Viper, I'm being jammed across all frequencies, Ghost reported, her voice tight with controlled panic. Even our satellite uplink is dark. Whoever these guys are, they've cut us off from the outside world. The lead enemy fighter, the one that had somehow shrugged off Ghost's missile, was closing fast on his 6 o'clock. Viper could see it clearly now through his rearview mirror, and what he saw made his blood freeze. The aircraft's configuration was perfect, down to the last rivet. But there, barely visible beneath hastily applied gray paint, he could make out the ghost of familiar markings. Tail number 05498. He knew that number. He'd flown alongside that specific aircraft dozens of times. It belonged to Captain Jake Mad Dog Morrison, his old wingman who'd supposedly died in a training accident 6 months ago. The same accident that had claimed 3 other Raptors and their pilots in what investigators called a catastrophic systems failure during routine maneuvers. Ghost, brake right. Brake right now. Viper's warning came just as another missile launched from the undead Raptor's weapons bay. The Sidewinder missed Ghost's aircraft by mere feet, its proximity fuse failing to detonate as she dove toward the ocean's surface. Viper made his decision. Court-martial or not, he wasn't going to die following illegal orders. Weapons hot. He flipped the master arm switch and felt his aircraft's combat systems come alive. Target acquisition radar painted the lead bogey, and his heads-up display flashed with firing solutions. Fox 2, his Sidewinder leaped from its pylon, tracking straight and true toward Morrison's stolen aircraft. For a heart-stopping moment, Viper thought he'd finally scored a kill. The missile's seeker head locked onto the enemy's heat signature, its warhead armed and ready. Then the impossible happened again. The enemy Raptor didn't just evade. It phased, becoming translucent for a split second as the missile passed harmlessly through what should have been solid aircraft. The Sidewinder, confused by the sudden loss of its target, self-destructed in a brilliant orange fireball that illuminated the storm clouds. "Holy shit," Ghost breathed over the comm. Did that thing just turn into a ghost? Before Viper could respond, his threat warning system exploded with alarms. All 8 enemy aircraft had achieved missile locks simultaneously, and his defensive systems were screaming warnings about incoming fire. But as he prepared for the final barrage that would end his life, something even stranger happened. The enemy formation suddenly broke off, scattering in 8 different directions like startled birds. For a moment, Viper thought they'd been reinforced, that friendly fighters had arrived to even the odds. But his radar showed empty sky except for Ghost's aircraft and his own. Then he heard it. A voice over his radio that made his heart skip a beat. "Viper, this is Mad Dog. Can you hear me?" The voice was distorted, running through some kind of electronic filter that made it sound hollow and distant. But underneath the digital corruption, he could hear the familiar Texas drawl that had told 1,000 jokes during long patrol flights. "Jake?" Viper's voice cracked with emotion. "Jesus Christ, Jake, is that really you? Listen carefully, brother. We don't have much time before they re-establish control." Morrison's words came in a rush, barely audible through the static and interference. "This isn't what it looks like. We're not the enemy. We're prisoners, Viper. All of us. They've got some kind of neural interface that forces us to fly these missions." Ghost's aircraft pulled alongside his, close enough that he could see her shocked expression through her canopy. She was monitoring the same frequency, hearing the same impossible conversation. "Who, Jake? Who's got you? I can't. The system's fighting me. They're trying to regain control." Morrison's voice was fading, becoming more distorted with each word. "The island. Coordinates 147.6 east, 12.3 north. Underground facility. They're using us to test. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by a burst of electronic noise that made Viper wince and adjust his headset. When the interference cleared, a new voice filled his earpiece. Cold, professional, and utterly without mercy. "Captain Rodriguez, Lieutenant Chen. You have witnessed classified military technology in operation. You will return to base immediately and report for debriefing. Any deviation from this order will be considered an act of treason." The voice belonged to General Harrison Webb, Viper's commanding officer. The same man who'd personally decorated him for valor after the Syrian incident 2 years ago. The same man who'd stood at Morrison's funeral and delivered a moving eulogy about sacrifice and duty. "General Webb?" Viper couldn't hide the shock in his voice. "Sir, what's going on here?" "Those aircraft classified, Captain, as is this entire operation. You will maintain radio silence and return to base immediately. That is a direct order." Through his canopy, Viper watched the 8 enemy aircraft reform into their perfect V formation, hanging in the air like mechanical vultures, waiting for the command to attack. But now he understood what he was seeing. Those weren't enemy pilots hunting him. They were American airmen being forced to hunt their own brothers in arms. "Ghost," he said quietly, switching to a secure frequency he hoped Webb couldn't monitor. "Remember those coordinates Morrison gave us?" 147.6 east, 12.3 north, she confirmed. "That puts it about 200 miles southeast of here. Middle of nowhere." "Not nowhere," Viper corrected, his mind already working on a flight plan. "Somewhere they can conduct illegal experiments without anyone asking questions. And if Webb's involved, this goes all the way to the top. His fuel gauge showed enough for maybe another hour of flight time, less if he pushed the engines hard. The coordinates Morrison had given them were at the edge of his range, and there was no guarantee they'd find anything except empty ocean. But as he watched the formation of stolen aircraft holding position like guard dogs waiting for their master's command, Marcus Rodriguez made the second career-ending decision of his military life. He was going to find that island. He was going to discover the truth about what happened to his friends. And if General Harrison Webb was running some kind of black project that turned American pilots into remote-controlled puppets, Viper was going to make damn sure the world found out about it. Ghost, you still with me? Until the wheels come off, Viper. What's the plan? As if in answer to her question, his threat warning system lit up again. All 8 aircraft were locking onto them once more, and this time, there would be no last-minute communication from Morrison to save them. Webb had apparently reasserted control over his unwilling pilots. The plan, Viper said, rolling his aircraft into a steep dive toward the storm-lashed ocean below, is to survive the next 10 minutes. Everything else is just details. The missiles began to fly, and the real battle for their lives began. The impact came like the fist of an angry god. Viper's Raptor hit the jungle canopy at 300 knots, its titanium fuselage carving through ancient mahogany trees like a chainsaw through kindling. The aircraft's frame groaned and buckled as massive branches tore away sections of wing and fuselage, each collision slowing the doomed fighter by precious increments. His ejection seat fired just as the nose cone struck a towering banyan tree, the explosive bolts severing his connection to the dying aircraft in a burst of smoke and flame. The parachute deployed with a violent jerk that nearly dislocated his shoulders, but it was too little, too late. Viper slammed through the upper canopy like a pinball, ricocheting off branches thick as telephone poles, before his chute finally snagged 30 feet above the jungle floor. He hung there for a moment, tasting copper blood and feeling the sharp stab of broken ribs with each breath. Ghost, do you copy? He keyed his survival radio with trembling fingers, praying that his wingman had managed a better landing than his own barely controlled crash. Static answered him, punctuated by the distant sound of his F-22's fuel tanks exploding somewhere deeper in the jungle. The fireball lit up the canopy in shades of orange and red, sending exotic birds screeching into the darkening sky. Viper activated his parachute release, dropping the final 30 feet to land hard on a carpet of rotting vegetation. Pain lanced through his left leg as he hit, and when he tried to put weight on it, stars exploded across his vision. Sprained ankle, possibly worse. The tactical situation was deteriorating by the second. He'd been falling for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes when he spotted the island through breaks in the storm clouds. It appeared on no chart he'd ever seen, a kidney-shaped mass of volcanic rock and jungle roughly 3 miles long and half as wide. According to his GPS, it shouldn't exist. The coordinates showed nothing but open ocean, yet here it was, hidden in plain sight like some kind of maritime magic trick. Now, as he limped through the underbrush with his survival pack and service pistol, Viper began to understand how that trick worked. The first clue was the birds, or rather, the lack of them. Despite the explosion that should have sent every living creature fleeing in terror, the jungle was eerily silent. No insect buzz, no monkey chatter, no rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. It was as if the entire ecosystem was artificial, maintained for appearance's sake, but lacking the chaotic vitality of real wilderness. The second clue was the vegetation itself. The trees looked right from a distance, but up close, Viper noticed subtle inconsistencies. Leaves that grew in the wrong patterns, bark that felt slightly too smooth, vines that hung at angles that defied gravity. Someone had spent enormous effort making this place look natural, but they'd gotten the details wrong. The third clue nearly got him killed. He was following what appeared to be an animal trail when his foot triggered a pressure plate hidden beneath a pile of dead leaves. The whine of charging capacitors filled the air, and Viper threw himself sideways just as a pulse laser carved through the space where his chest had been. The beam sliced cleanly through a tree trunk 2 feet thick, leaving the massive hardwood to topple with a crash that echoed through the artificial jungle. Automated defense perimeter, he muttered, recognizing military technology when he saw it. What the hell is this place? His question was answered 20 minutes later when he reached a ridge overlooking the island's interior. What he saw below made his blood run cold. Carved into the volcanic rock was a facility that belonged in a science fiction movie, not hidden beneath a tropical paradise. Massive concrete bunkers squatted like geometric toads among carefully manicured clearings, their surfaces bristling with communication arrays, radar dishes, and weapon emplacements. Aircraft hangars large enough to house bomber squadrons stretched along perfectly straight runways that had been cut directly into the living rock. And everywhere he looked, Viper saw the unmistakable shapes of F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning IIs, and aircraft he couldn't immediately identify, sleek, predatory forms that looked like they'd been designed by aliens, with a malicious sense of humor. But it was the people that made his hands shake with rage. Through his survival scope, he watched technicians in military fatigues swarming over the aircraft like ants serving their queen. But these weren't ordinary maintenance crews. Each technician wore a collar around their neck, a thick band of metal and electronics that pulsed with a soft red light. And their movements were wrong, too coordinated, too mechanical. They worked with the efficiency of machines, never speaking, never resting, never showing any sign of independent thought. Then he saw the pilots. They emerged from underground barracks, in perfect formation, their flight suits immaculate, their faces blank as department store mannequins. Each wore the same electronic collar, the same dead expression. Viper counted 12 of them, and his heart nearly stopped as he recognized faces through his scope. Morrison was there, moving with robotic precision toward one of the modified Raptors. So was Captain Lisa Razor Martinez, officially killed in a helicopter crash 8 months ago, and Lieutenant Colonel David Bulldog Washington, who'd supposedly died of a heart attack during routine physical training. They were all supposed to be dead. But here they were, walking and breathing and climbing into cockpits with the mechanical efficiency of remote-controlled drones. Jesus Christ, a familiar voice whispered from behind him. It's true. They're all here. Viper spun around to find Ghost emerging from the jungle, her flight suit torn and bloody, her left arm hanging useless at her side. Her parachute landing had been even rougher than his, but she was alive and mobile, which made her the best backup he could ask for. "How long have you been watching?" he asked, helping her settle into a concealed position behind a fallen log, long enough to see them load live ordnance onto those aircraft. "This isn't a research facility, Viper. It's a goddamn factory. They're mass-producing puppet pilots." Before he could respond, the sound of rotors filled the air. A black helicopter rose from the facility's helipad, its running lights dark, its identification numbers obscured by what looked like electronic camouflage. As it settled onto a landing platform carved from the cliff face, 3 figures emerged from the passenger compartment. Viper's blood turned to ice as he recognized the lead figure through his scope. General Harrison Webb stepped out of the helicopter like he owned the world, his uniform immaculate despite the tropical humidity. Behind him came 2 men Viper didn't recognize, one in an expensive suit that screamed corporate executive, the other in military fatigues without insignia. The businessman carried a briefcase that he guarded like his firstborn child, while the soldier moved with the predatory grace of special forces. Corporate backing and military oversight, Ghost observed quietly. This is bigger than just Webb. Someone's financing a private army. They watched as Webb led his companions toward the main bunker, past rows of collared technicians who never looked up from their work. The general moved with the confidence of a man reviewing his personal kingdom, pointing out features of the facility with obvious pride. Whatever was happening here, he was clearly in charge. "We need to get closer," Viper decided. "Find out what they're really doing. Get some evidence we can transmit to the outside world." "With what? Our radios are still jammed, and even if they weren't, who would believe us? Webb's got enough pull to bury any investigation." Viper was about to respond when movement in the facility caught his attention. The collared pilots were climbing into their aircraft, their movements synchronized like dancers in some macabre ballet. Engines began spinning up, filling the artificial valley with the scream of military turbofans. They're launching another mission, Ghost realized. More American pilots forced to attack their own people. As if summoned by her words, a new voice echoed across the facility through strategically placed loudspeakers. Webb's amplified tones carried clearly to their hiding place, his words chilling in their casual brutality. "Attention all test subjects. Mission parameters have been updated. You are authorized to use lethal force against any resistance encountered during today's exercise. Failure to comply with neural directives will result in immediate termination of life support functions." Good hunting. The modified aircraft began rolling toward the runways, their pilots trapped inside cockpits that had become electronic prisons. Soon they would be airborne, heading out to engage more unsuspecting American forces in what Webb's victims would experience as training exercises right up until the moment live weapons tore them apart. "We have to stop this," Viper said, checking his pistol's magazine. 15 rounds against an entire military facility. The odds were astronomical, but doing nothing wasn't an option. "Stop it how?" "We're 2 injured pilots with small arms against a fortified position, defended by automated weapons and however many guards they've got down there." Before he could answer, an explosion echoed from deeper in the facility. Alarms began wailing, and red lights strobed from every building. Through his scope, Viper saw technicians running in controlled panic while guards poured out of barracks buildings. Someone else was here, someone with enough firepower to cause serious damage to Webb's operation. The question was, were they friend or foe? The explosion had come from the facility's main power generator, sending a pillar of black smoke spiraling into the storm-darkened sky. Emergency lighting bathed the underground complex in hellish red as backup systems struggled to compensate for the catastrophic power loss. Through his scope, Viper watched Webb screaming orders at panicked technicians while armed guards spread out in defensive positions. That wasn't an accident, Ghost observed, wincing as she adjusted her injured arm. Someone just declared war on this place. The answer came in the form of automatic gunfire echoing from the facility's eastern perimeter. Muzzle flashes strobed in the artificial twilight as unseen attackers engaged Webb security forces. But these weren't the random shots of guerrillas or pirates. The firing patterns were too disciplined, too coordinated. Military precision. Friendly forces, Viper realized, hope flaring in his chest for the first time since this nightmare began. Someone finally figured out what Webb's been doing. His optimism lasted exactly 30 seconds. The attacking force emerged from the jungle like ghosts materializing from smoke, and Viper's blood froze as he counted their numbers. 12 figures in advanced tactical gear moved with inhuman coordination, their weapons firing in perfect synchronization. But it was their movements that triggered his alarm bells. Too fluid, too precise, lacking the controlled chaos of human soldiers in combat. They wore the same electronic collars as Webb's technicians. Jesus Christ, Ghost breathed. Those are more of his puppets. This whole attack is another test. Through the facility's loudspeakers, Webb's voice crackled with static and barely controlled fury. Control Test Alpha 7 is proceeding as planned. Combat effectiveness of neural interface subjects exceeds expectations. Continue engagement protocols. The puppet soldiers advanced through Webb's defenses like a scythe through wheat, their collared handlers coordinating the assault from underground bunkers. Every move was calculated for maximum efficiency, every shot placed with mechanical precision. They weren't fighting to survive. They were demonstrating a product for potential buyers. And that's when Viper spotted the observers. A group of men in expensive suits watched the battle from behind reinforced windows in the main bunker, their faces lit by the glow of tactical displays. One was taking notes while another spoke rapidly into a satellite phone. The businessman who'd arrived with Webb stood among them, his briefcase now open to reveal what looked like transfer documents. They're selling the technology, Viper realized. This whole facility is a demonstration for foreign buyers. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If Webb's neural control system fell into the wrong hands, every military pilot in the world would become a potential weapon against their own forces. American, Chinese, Russian, it wouldn't matter. Whoever controlled the collars would control the pilots. We have to stop this, he said, checking his weapon again. Still 15 rounds against impossible odds, but the math had changed. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about preventing a technology that could reshape modern warfare from being sold to the highest bidder. Stop it how? Ghost demanded. We're two injured pilots with sidearms against a fortified position full of mind-controlled super soldiers. Viper was about to admit he didn't know when fate handed him an answer in the form of Morrison's voice crackling through his survival radio. Viper, Ghost, if you're listening, we need your help. The transmission was weak, filled with static and electronic interference, but unmistakably his old wingman's voice. Somehow Morrison had broken free of Webb's control long enough to establish communication. Jake, we're here. What's your situation? The neural interface, it's not perfect. Strong emotional responses can create feedback loops. Give us moments of clarity. Morrison's words came in breathless bursts, as if he was fighting against electronic restraints with every syllable. We've been fighting it, all of us, waiting for a chance to break free. How many of you are there? Ghost asked, leaning close to Viper's radio. 37 pilots in various stages of conditioning. They've been perfecting the process for months, using us as test subjects. But the system has weaknesses. If you can reach the control center and overload the neural network, we might be able to regain control of our own minds. Through his scope, Viper watched the puppet soldiers systematically dismantling Webb's defensive positions. The demonstration was clearly winding down, which meant the buyers would be leaving soon. With them would go the technology to create armies of mind-controlled pilots. Where's the control center, he asked. Sub-level 3, beneath the main bunker. But Viper, it's heavily guarded, and the access routes are monitored by automated defense systems. You'll never make it through conventional assault. Then we don't go conventional, Viper decided. his mind already working on a desperate plan. "Ghost, can you still fly?" She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "With a dislocated shoulder and a possible concussion?" "Sure, if you don't mind crash landing." "That's exactly what I have in mind." He pointed toward the facility's flight line, where several of Webb's modified aircraft sat unattended while their puppet pilots engaged in the demonstration battle. "We steal one of those Raptors, load it with whatever ordnance we can find, and fly it straight into the bunker. A kamikaze run? Viper, that's suicide. Not kamikaze. Precision strike. We punch through the bunker's roof, bail out at the last second, and fight our way to the control center while Webb's people are dealing with a very large hole in their headquarters." Ghost stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head with a rueful smile. "You know what? I've had worse ideas. How do we get to the aircraft without being detected?" The answer came from Morrison, whose voice crackled through the radio with new urgency. "The puppet soldiers are programmed to ignore anything they're not specifically ordered to engage. If you can make yourselves look like technicians or maintenance crew, you should be able to move freely during the demonstration." Viper looked down at their torn flight suits and bloodied faces. "That's going to require some creative camouflage." 20 minutes later, they were moving through the facility's service tunnels, wearing stolen maintenance coveralls and electronic ID badges taken from unconscious technicians. The puppet soldiers' demonstration had reached its climax, with the collared warriors systematically destroying the last pockets of resistance, while their potential buyers watched with evident satisfaction. The flight line was eerily quiet, its complement of modified aircraft sitting ready for missions that would never come if Viper and Ghost succeeded. They approached the nearest F-22, its weapon bays loaded with live ordnance that gleamed like deadly jewelry in the emergency lighting. "This one's fueled and armed," Ghost reported, running her hands over the external systems. "Looks like they've modified the stealth systems with some kind of adaptive camouflage. No wonder our missiles couldn't lock onto them." Viper climbed into the pilot's seat, his hands automatically running through pre-flight checks, despite the surreal circumstances. The cockpit was standard F-22 configuration, but additional displays showed the status of the neural interface system. According to the readouts, this particular aircraft was configured for remote operation, no pilot required. "Ghost, there's no second seat in this thing. It's been converted to a drone." "Then I guess I'm riding cargo," she replied grimly, squeezing into the equipment bay behind his ejection seat. "Just promise me you'll warn me before you punch out." "Deal. But first we need to reach the bunker without being shot down." He initiated the startup sequence, feeling the twin engines spin up to idle power. "Morrison, we're about to go airborne. Any chance you and the others can provide a distraction?" "Already working on it," Morrison's voice replied. "We've been sabotaging our own aircraft during the demonstration. Half our weapon systems are offline, and we're about to experience multiple simultaneous engine failures. Should draw attention away from your approach." As if summoned by his words, explosions began echoing from the demonstration area. Puppet soldiers who'd been methodically destroying targets suddenly found themselves under fire from their own malfunctioning aircraft. Alarms wailed across the facility as Webb's carefully orchestrated show collapsed into chaos. Viper didn't wait for clearance. He shoved the throttles forward and felt the stolen Raptor leap into the air like a caged predator finally freed. The aircraft climbed rapidly into the storm-lashed sky, its modified stealth systems making it nearly invisible to the facility's defensive radar. Below them, the island complex spread out like a cancer on the ocean's surface, its lights strobing frantically as Webb's people tried to regain control of their wayward demonstration. But it was too late for damage control. Whatever happened next, the buyers had seen enough to know that the neural interface technology was unstable, unreliable, and potentially catastrophic if deployed in the field. "Target acquired," Viper announced, rolling the aircraft into a steep dive toward the main bunker. "Ghost, we're going to punch through that roof in 30 seconds. Get ready to move fast once we're on the ground. Roger and Viper?" "It's been an honor flying with you." "Likewise. But save the eulogies for after we stop Webb." The bunker rushed up to meet them at 500 miles per hour, its reinforced concrete roof growing larger with each heartbeat. At the last possible second, Viper triggered both ejection seats, sending himself and Ghost rocketing clear of the doomed aircraft just as it punched through the bunker's roof in an explosion of debris and twisted metal. The real battle was just beginning.